This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. This is September 1st. Yes, you heard it here. It is the first day of September. Beautiful outside. Oh, this is WEFT's weekly look on the Prairie Monk program. Weekly look at rails, trails, greenways, conservation, natural areas, and whatever Dave has been up to. It's beautiful out there. It was raining, of course, this morning. The streets are nice and wet. It looks like people are going to be filming movies. Have you ever noticed how the streets are always wet in movies because it makes them look prettier or something like that? Beautiful temperature out there, and it was great bicycling. So, yes, that's my commentary on the weather today. And now we'll actually turn you over to Dave and his show.
People also like to have drops of water on their flowers and things like that.
It does make things look prettier, doesn't it?
Yes. So, and if it doesn't rain, they sometimes spray a little water on the picture.
So what's up?
So, today I want to report on art in Champaign-Urbana. It's a fundamental part of the community. It's why a lot of people come here and stay here. There's a big group of musicians that work. There are also alternate people who just enjoy music. There's a bar trade. There's a dynamics that goes on in this community. Urbana is slightly different from Champaign. Champaign got a railroad line, and that made them more of a commercial town with a bigger budget than Urbana. But Urbana spends a lot of money supporting art and art activities, and that is appreciated. The university is in the middle, and the two towns on either side would like to have their own character and not be totally dependent on university facilities with its fine arts department and its granite art museum and music, the two granite art museums. And so this week there was a meeting at the city building, which involved low-income housing to start with, but then the next matter of consideration was a request for $20,000 to support mostly the music events that come on Friday night. And it's one of the most interesting council meetings I've been to in a long time. Everyone seemed to be on the same wavelengths. The city management, which has the experts that look at this sort of thing and look at the funds. Rob Kowalski, who was presenting a case for some opportunity here, where the funds might come from. And the city manager was helpful, and the mayor was interested. The board was also interested, and there was a support group in the audience, which must have been about 30 artists. And the hearing went on for probably the best part of 2 or 3 hours, and many people spoke. And there's a history here. Some of them went back to the era when Champaign was vacating the downtown to the malls. And so this was a somewhat dead central business district. And so others were dealing with here and now and very recent activities of 40 North, supported and accoladed by support of Kelly White, who's been moving and shaking this 40 North for quite some time. Go back on a little bit of history. Many of our non-profit agencies are at least 75 years old. The forest preserves sort of fall into that category. There was an arts council, and it operated quite extensively for many years. It spun off the symphony, Champaign-Urbana Symphony, and that still exists and is active. Up until the middle of the 60s, the Arts Council was providing workshops and art opportunities. One of the leaders was Mrs. Markland, who is the mother of more recently, mayor of Urbana. And so we go back to that history when there was a fire on Main Street, the third floor of one of the buildings opposite where the News Gazette is now. There was a grand piano, which was part of the Arts Council. Sokolsky was a major person in getting a comeback for art, and gradually the community has, like many communities in the United States and around the world, has become more urban, more gentrified. Champaign is still a modestly sized city, but it has the elements of bringing people together. And when you have groups that are large enough, then you get to bounce off of each other and enjoy life, and also improve the quality of your activity. So going back to the 60s when there was an attempt to have a mall shut off Neal Street, and there was a mall there, an open-air mall. It was at the time when the country was creating malls, and they weren't always successful, but it was something that was of the time. It actually cut off the traffic around the city. You could no longer come down Neal Street and go straight through. You had to go around. And the mall was kind of cool, windy, and not awfully attractive, but it did include art. It took $1 million to create it and $1 million to take it out eventually. And now Neal Street is open through traffic. There were many attempts like this to reactivate downtown. Bars tended to come back. Chris Knight had some involvement with that, with the creation of Blind Pig bars and early reconstruction of the downtown with an emphasis on drinking facilities that were initially like 8 and then 12, and then it was decided that bars should have laissez-faire, and if they did well, they stayed, and if they didn't do well, they didn't stay. So it was left up to the market. But in recent times, the gentrification has meant that buildings that could be bought for $20,000 now are in the vicinity of $300,000, and development is across from Weft and all around town. There's been various attempts to do things. There was a big debate about whether we should have more car traffic in downtown, accessibility. Doesn't always work. Sometimes if I've watched towns, one in Iowa, I watched Nebraska perhaps, had a lot of debate about leaving the main street through the town. Didn't exactly work because the main street traffic didn't stop. But a parking garage was put in. There was a lot of debate about that too, because the alternate community, artists included, were anxious to have walking traffic, but not vehicle traffic. But a fairly substantial parking garage went in. It wasn't awfully well occupied for quite some time, and it required payment. And at that time, the parking meters were opened till 9 o'clock at night, and there were various other things that discouraged artists from being downtown. They had occupied buildings, ourselves included, at a low rental rate, and when this sort of happened, then artists that were in modest circumstances with low rent and low parking costs tended to move out of town. That has sort of come to a different conclusion. The artists have moved back. Perhaps they're not the same artists, but when you're way out in the boondocks in a small town where you can get low rent, not very many people move there. So there's a chance to do something different. The Lincoln Building, which is sort of on Market Street and Main Street, it was built for attorneys, but the attorneys have developed their own facilities, and the Lincoln Building now has perhaps as many as 20 artists in those facilities. And the people who have come to support bars and other businesses have encouraged those people. And so there's a balance between art and commerce. But if you stand outside Weft on a good day on a Friday night, there are a lot of people, often friends and relatives of the artists, and it's a very friendly event. People meet each other, and the children dance. The dogs come and are on leashes, but seem to enjoy. Very small kids walk out and around. They're very curious. And there's a beer garden that has replaced the Pocket Prairie, but it's doing very well, and there's a relationship between the city and the bar that people can drink sensibly on the street and have some sort of armband to say that. And so that's been working well too. And there are, I think, 4 venues where people play music, and the 40 North with Kelly White, and another person who is very instrumental in this is Ralph Russa. And if you've been at Weft, you know that he used to be a party of Weft. He was the editor of the Weft Review for a while, and he does a lot of emceeing. He's an artist, and he and Kelly went to school at the same time, and together they make an interesting team. The city meeting was well attended by artists. There must have been 20 or 30 artists sitting behind the podium, and many of them spoke in support of 40 North. There are people who have been administrators, and they would be willing to point out that you can't get people together and make contact with people and have supporters if you don't have the equivalent of a laboratory and people who do that. So doing this on a shoestring is not ideal. It's been done with a lot of volunteer help. So Ralph was there to speak, and he's a kind of dynamic fellow, and he has been working with the poor TAP organization and has artwork there. And he was there yesterday talking to many people and getting ideas for the future. The request that was made was specifically for $20,000. But the debate was more, what do we do in the future? Is there some long-range planning for this? Urbana has some of the same questions, but it's been doing this for a long time, and they do support artists. So eventually, the 40 North got its 20,000, but I think they got much more than that, because in terms of the fairly large budget of Champaign City, 20,000 is a very small amount, and it's fairly obvious that the art activities do bring people to town. Some of the things that the city has done have been very helpful, but it's been on a one-time basis. The city, for instance, spent about 30,000 donation to 40 North already. So this would be an addition of 20,000. They also provide a considerable amount of backup facilities, police and fire and boards that tell you that the street is closed, and there are other sundry supports that the city provides. So it's not without generosity, but it's been fairly much come and ask us and we'll do it now. But there is a need for long-range planning, especially if you're going to spend $250 million on a ice hockey rink. That is in the future, and some of us wonder how the art community will fit into that facility and into the town. So there was this debate, and some people were not prepared to provide for the 20,000 because they were interested in long-range planning. Others were saying that if you want to have music people here in the coming year, you need that 20,000 to go into action now, because they have long-range schedules, and you can't just do that instantaneously. You need support. So there's a lot of support for the 20,000, but there was also much more than that. There was the request for long-range planning, and I think that will happen as the budget is considered and long-range planning is concerned. The city will get involved with that. It also involves park districts and that have also been instrumental in doing things. Early on, when there was not a lot of this sort of activity and there was more or less a dead central business district, we were part of an art in the park. There were Lucille Zeroli and Gertrude Wiseman and Elvin Mork and a Rakua artist and ourselves. And that worked fairly well. It gradually morphed into more crafts than art, and then food and drink were added, and it became the taste of Champagne. So these things start in a small manner, and they accumulate. You have to be a little bit amazed at how it happens. So that's what I encourage you to be active and involved in some of these things, because what you do in the basement with 2 or 3 people might eventually become something that's quite sensible. The art in the park was, after becoming craft and a taste of Champagne, it was not very attractive for juried art. So that venue was taken to Neal Street, and it worked there for a while, but it didn't work awfully well. We really do need a venue where artists can come together, juried artists can come together. Art in the park is fun and good, but there's always the chances you get dust on your images, you get trees with Cartesian pores dropping material on your artwork. So we need that venue where people can get together with quality art. It was tried with Verde Gallery. Verde Gallery was on Taylor Street, very near to Weft, and it operated for perhaps 4 years, 5 years, and invited in guests and speakers and art. It was more visited rather than purchased. The art was often fairly high-priced art, and it didn't quite have this the backing of the community in the same way as we're seeing it now. Kurt Tucker was instrumental in doing that, and the people who do gaming on Main Street and Cora Main and Neal were involved, and I think they owned the gallery, and Kurt was the manager. So these little things all add up and eventually contribute to a whole. A boneyard festival was established, and it sent you to people's studios, which is different from sending people to a juried gallery. It's the Boneyard Festival also invited businesses to provide a venue for artists, and that was many. And there were also pop-up places where a city building that was not occupied could be occupied for 2 or 3 days for the Boneyard Festival, and that has grown in size. So it too contributes to an overall situation. There were other special events that made art more acceptable or more a real part of downtown Champaign. One of the things that the city did was to take the sidewalks and narrow the street a little and increase the size of the sidewalks, and so you could eat outside and drink in appropriate places. You could rent some of the street, and you had traffic on the streets, which was unpopular. So people had their opportunities to come and support the restaurants and and ale houses, and Weft was there. Weft was part of 4 buildings that were empty. And at one stage we went to the Kresge Foundation and asked if we could have 4 non-profit agencies supported here. Kresge Foundation said this is interesting and they appreciated it, but we didn't have collateral to support. If we failed, then we didn't have anything to back us up. If they were contributing to a heart wing for a hospital and it didn't work out, then the hospital was there as collateral. So that didn't happen, but we got some supportive accolades for making the attempt. We did get Weft and we did get Rubel, who had a sound studio, and we did get ourselves, and we established ourselves on shoestrings, and that has continued through for a long time, and Weft and the Arias and Heartland Pathways are still struggling. So they too are part of an overall plan. How do you maintain a Weft and educational resources in the midst of development? So how do we plan for streetscape, for instance? It used to be that the venue that was has been right outside Weft was over in front of the railroad station, but if you come west from Champaign, from Urbana, and under the viaduct, that piece of Chestnut is well trafficked and it's well parked, and it's not an easy place to close it off for a music venue. So with the development of the poor tap, it's easier to block off Market Street at the University Avenue end and at the Taylor Street end. And the bar has power opportunities that allow for the equipment that you need for amplification. People come, they bring their chairs. I think I would like to see a few more chairs around because I think people would like to sit down. We have a bench outside ERS, and I have been observing up to 7 people sitting on that bench and listening. We have to move with the gentrification. We have a storefront that we own, and if it doesn't look gentrified, then we might lose out. So if you look like an antique store, which we do, then that's not very helpful. So we had to think about upgrading our facilities to meet with the need. The alternative is for us to be not in our backyard, in NIMBY, and we can go out on the boondocks. But we know that that doesn't always work for artists. We've tried that with the input of a parking garage. People did move out to Sydney or other places, but they're isolated there. So we need the artists, and we need them downtown. So we have to activate ourselves to do that. Weft had a very nice example of such a thing. There was a wine walk around town, and Weft was part of that, and a whole bunch of people came in to visit Weft that would otherwise not be here. There's a game store just next to Weft, and it's people who have been at the music will go in there and enjoy. Seven Saints, which is next door by 2 or 3 storefronts, is doing well with this sort of activity. So I encourage you to think about what you might do to encourage, perhaps even to take on the concept of art yourself. Is there something that you might like to do? Do you put together tin cans and make something interesting? How do we encourage you, and how do you encourage us to stand in front of the city and say, we need this sort of support, the community needs it. We're near the railroad, we're near MTD, Mass Transit Building, and we're near the potential $250 million development, which may or may not eventuate, but a lot of the buildings are already empty there and ready to for a development if it happens. That means some people have to go off to Washington to get support money. Some people have to go to the states for support money. And the concept has to grow. And we do need people to write a letter to the paper in support. The Big Dig, just a little way away on 2nd Street, has been instrumental in creating a pond that can collect water from a 5-inch rainfall, and that is then let out slowly, so you don't have to be able to canoe down Green Street in a storm. So it's holding the water back and letting it out slowly. But the dig also has a character and a pond, 2 ponds, and it has wildlife that goes with it, and it has the history of a railroad which started off taking freight and people from the Champaign depot through to Urbana, and it would turn around at the courthouse and come back. First of it all, it was drawn by horses, and eventually by steam, and then eventually by electrical facilities. So the little bridge is still there that says this is where the interurban or the tramway was. There's been some opportunity for people to go to Europe and go to sites that have reconstructed their tramways to see if we couldn't have a tramway between Champaign campus, the university, and Urbana. It used to work. I was at the Sweet Corn Festival, and I saw 2 policemen standing on a piece of concrete, and I wanted to say to them that did they realize that they were standing on top of a railroad that was part of where you turned around at the courthouse and went back to the campus and to Champaign. Champaign is, that railroad is still there. It was covered up with concrete, but it could be uncovered at some stage. You look for these little things that make life real. The Champaign would like to have a midtown, so that Big Dig, or it's got a more formal name. It's a conservation place for water. That's called Midtown, and around the part of it is Park District, and that's been planted to prairie, and the pond attracts wildlife and development around it. So we now have a midtown, and that's often touted as encouraging people to come to Champaign, whereas in the past, students especially tended to congregate around the campus and not be in either towns. So this midtown effect is there. Urbana is also interested in the boneyard which runs through the university, and how can they reconstruct the boneyard and make it less of a sewer and more of a parkland, and allow students to enjoy a bike ride to Urbana. We have rail possibilities of bringing recreational steam into Champaign, and it's in its early stages. We're starting to re-rail 4 miles of Heartland Pathways territory to come into Seymour and Bonneville, Staley, and into town. That sort of thing takes a long time to do. There's also connectivity between the Kickapoo Trail, which goes through to Danville, and how do you get people across town? So people who are interested in bicycling should be able to be part of planning meetings that bring those sorts of people together. The average person is not about to put together a big meeting. So this is the job of the city, job of the organizations like 40 North, and then we look north, and we're looking at a possibility of taking eco-tourists off the 57 at Kankakee, and there's this wonderful sand dunes there that provide a different sort of vegetation, different habitat, and we would like that Route 45 trail that goes right through the state to be activated as a trace. It has been replaced by 57, so there is the traffic is basically on 57. So then you can put off pull-ups on 45 and have a bicycle trail. There's an old existing road, 45, parallel to a new 45 that goes 10 miles to Paxton. We would like to activate that as a start. But if you look, you can think about dreams. You might get to Rantoul, and there's all those power poles there that represent where the electric tramway came from Urbana to Rantoul. Could something like that be activated as a bicycle trail? How do we encourage people to come to Champaign and look for a royal architect and enjoy finding out about how we work, not necessarily only with the university, but with the two communities that are surrounding it. How do you move through that town without getting killed on a bicycle? How do you... So I talked to someone in planning who was from MTD, the director, and see if we can find corridors to the north and the south which would allow people to move about. So when we're looking for planning for the arts, we're looking for planning for arts and the other things that go with it. And it also involves communities, and if you have a trace between Kankakee and Cairo in the south, then there are all sorts of established already facilities that you could visit and enjoy. We don't necessarily have to go to Venice to get our jollies in Europe. We've all come from Europe in one way or another, or many of us have. And one of the interesting things about some of this is that the black community has been more involved. They have been to the music festivals, and it's very difficult for them to be a part of the overall plan. How do you do that? How do you connect with the new Bristol Place development up on North Market? How does that merge into the city in general? And rather than having a one plot with all the same sort of people in it, how do we somehow spread that out and around so we have some interaction? And I think that I've been here long enough to see improvements, but the improvements come very, very slowly. And so how do we develop black community businesses, black art, black philosophy, and how does that interact with the Scandinavian community or the Irish community, or they're sometimes in small entities and very separate, but I've seen it come from the day when the railroad station had separate toilets to the day when there's been much more integration, and art facilitates that. I'm looking at my notes here because I think that sometime or other we should have a get-together that would include people like Weft and Heartland Pathways, and see if they should remain in downtown or die off with the developments, and how do you inspire that? And at the moment I see the possibilities, and I thought that meeting was one of the best that I have been to. All council meetings are good, even if they're a little challenging. You have to know that people are giving part of their lives to making decisions that are hard to make, and how do we do that? We're in a very fortunate situation where we have many ethnic groups, many people who cross ethnic groups, and I just this week was talking to someone who's grown up here as an architect, and Dan has been going to New Orleans and restoring buildings there, and he's found it very, very interesting. So he's part of Packer and has had a lot to do with taking surviving materials from the Pepsin factory in Monticello, and so we talked for an hour or more just by the fact that I was outside doing something with Prairie Seed, and so that sort of interaction is helpful. We need to be here, but we don't have huge amounts of money, and Weft is in the same boat. To be active to the point where you have a wine visit and people come in that would never otherwise have come into Weft is excellent. So I've been very pleased with this week, and I hope that continues. And congratulations to Kelly White and Ralph Rusa, and come visit his art. It's in the bar across the way, and the bar provided a very good statement. They one of the concerns is this art bringing business, and so he gave a letter that included that the business upgrade that came from basically having music outside in the street. And this sort of interaction was very good. Others had reason to say that one guy has lost out to a DUI person. So he was in an accident which wasn't his fault, but he was in a coma for a while and in hospital. But Kelly had facilitated him coming back with his band that would otherwise not have had that sort of facility. So there is a moral code behind this, which is more than just art. So the two people came and stood beside him, and they were the people who were part of that band. Other people, Weitzman, who was a retired person from the Carl Clinic as a doctor, has been a prominent artist, and he's that's been his second avocation, and he got up to say that this really needs support for the administration of something like 40 North. Others, Melissa Mitchell, I think, wrote a letter, and she's been organizing a walk around the artists in downtown, and sometimes these things overlap, but it's very positive. Peg Shore, who is in charge of, she's very much involved with Parkland College and video material and her own art, and she also plays drums, and she wrote a letter that was helpful, and some of this sort of thing finds people in the community colleges that you may not find in the university. Sometimes we have on Monday night a WEF session, and some of those people are students coming back, some of them are professors, some of them are people at Parkland College that are looking for a career, but not wanting to be an academic in the same sense as the university people. And this interaction allows for a lot of people to enjoy each other's company. Just last week I had a visit from a guy named Lutz, who was, I think, in my class when I was teaching outdoor education at the university, and he transports people to do forgetting the name, but you if you have diabetes or some of the problems of you need to have dialysis. So he is in Paris, but he belongs to a group of rider organization, I think non-profit, that brings people from Paris to dialysis facilities in Terre Haute or Champagne, and we discovered each other, or he discovered me. He'd been waiting to take a patient back, and had read my name in the next door building, and so we went around to the square and talked for quite a while, and he'll be back, and that's out of town. That is probably best part of 70 miles away to get to Paris, and the organization is mainly in the southern part of the state. But knowing about that facility and who supports it, and something about the climate that you get in southern Illinois is much warmer than up north. So just going to places like the Carrie's fruit and vegetable stand at the farmers market, you have to know that they have farmland support in Anna, Illinois, and that'll just that contact is interesting, and we have to wonder what's going to happen as climate changes. Are some of those plants going to be growing in north? We already have animals that did not come further north, and they're coming north. So things are changing. How do we integrate these things? It's been a time when you had little towns 5 miles apart, elevators 5 miles apart, and relatively independent, not a lot of transportation. A railroad to start with, and roads parallel to the rails. But these days, some of those places are beginning to integrate. They're beginning to have internet so that you can have a small industry in a small town. But there's a tendency for some of the younger people to come to the town, but then sometimes people decide to come back, and they find it interesting and helpful to start an industry that is their passion, and they may not fit exactly when they come back because they're different. They've probably been out and been to a major city, but eventually they bring a quality of life to those communities, and whether it's Ivesdale or Paxton or Rantoul, and so grabbing up some of these abandoned railroad beds that just join those communities is also helpful. I talk to people in Danville, and so how do they get to Oakwood? Well, there's a big bridge which is 100 feet off the ground, and that will take $2 million to create a rail trail on it, and you have to make sure that no one's going to fall off that bridge, because you die if you fall that far and fall into a bunch of trees that are caught under the pylons of the bridge. But gradually we want to narrow a trail there, just because people don't know their own ecosystem. It's prairie, and it's almost endangered. Corn and soybean is not a friendly part of it. So you have these little plots that need to be connected, and we hope that the next phases of the Kickapoo Trail will have a narrower base. So we have to talk to that. So I talk to people who live in St. Joe, live in Ogden, and there seems to be a general agreement that we should maintain our prairies. Not easy. I have people to volunteer at Rantoul, and they end up with chiggers. And David was up there on Monday. Was it Monday, I think? Thursday, that's right. And he was taking down teasel. And did you get chiggers?
No, not a single thing. I barely got a bite. I think I had one bite on the back of my neck, and that was it. But no bugs on me as ticks or anything when I got home.
So it's unfortunate that the ecosystem is not the most interesting ecosystem, but it's our ecosystem. It's our biology. It's our biochemistry, and we need it, and we need you to think about it. I think this is time to go. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers and no one else.